There is a strange betrayal at the heart of modern comfort, a kind of quiet irony humming beneath the blankets of a nation that believes itself insulated from winter. We live surrounded by objects that promise warmth as a product, memory foam beds that feel like engineered clouds, comforters swollen with synthetic loft, thermostats that maintain a perfect number as if temperature were a subscription you simply renew each month. And yet, for all this manufactured ease, we have become colder in a deeper sense. Colder not only in the room, but in our relationship to warmth itself. The truth is unsettling. People in 18th and 19th century America often slept warmer than we do, despite drafty cabins, thin walls, and wind that slipped through cracks like a living thing. They had less, but they lost less. Their nights were harsher, but their systems were smarter. Modern humans have more technology, yet we are more dependent on electricity and more vulnerable to winter's sudden teeth. This is not because our ancestors were made of tougher material, born with some stoic gene we no longer possess. It is because they lived closer to the physics that govern survival. In a world without central heating, warmth was not assumed. It was built, defended, and maintained like a fire. And because it mattered, people understood it. They knew, without formulas, how heat behaves in a confined space, how it flees through the wrong pathways, how moisture can turn comfort into cold, and how a single careless gap at the neck can become a chimney that bleeds warmth into the dark. Today, we confuse softness with insulation. We confuse thickness with efficiency. We think warmth is something we purchase, then forget. Our ancestors could not afford forgetfulness. Sleep was not a lifestyle accessory, it was a nightly negotiation with the cold, sometimes a confrontation. If a child shivered too long, if an old man failed to keep core temperature stable, the consequences were not discomfort, but danger. So bedding was treated like clothing and shelter, not a decoration, but an engineered system of layers, seals, and materials. Their knowledge was pragmatic, but it was also philosophical. They respected winter as a force of nature, not as an inconvenience to be canceled by a wall thermostat. Underneath this is a fundamental truth of thermodynamics that modern life has allowed us to ignore. Heat always moves from hot to cold. It does not care about branding. It does not respect aesthetics. It will leave your body by any route available, down into the mattress, sideways into moving air, and invisibly through the evaporation of moisture from your skin. Modern bedding often addresses only one pathway, usually the one we can see, the air above us. But a system that fails to manage all three is like a fortress with a gilded front gate and open holes in the wall. The tragedy is that we are not suffering from a shortage of blankets. We are suffering from a shortage of understanding. We have outsourced warmth to machines and lost the ancestral literacy that once made simple materials perform like miracles. The old world did not sleep warmer because it had more wool, more quilts, more firewood. It slept warmer because it understood warmth itself, how to trap it, how to protect it, how to keep it where it belongs. And that is the paradox that should stop you in your tracks. In the age of engineered comfort, we have become amateurs at staying warm. But what was forgotten can be reclaimed, not by buying more, but by remembering what heat truly is, a finite resource your body produces and physics relentlessly tries to steal. But this paradox isn't just cultural amnesia, it's also a design problem, because many of the advanced things we trust to keep us warm are quietly built to fail.
Modern bedding is marketed like armor, but it behaves more like theater. It looks substantial, feels luxurious for the first few minutes, and persuades you that thickness is synonymous with protection. Yet winter does not negotiate with appearances. It tests systems. It punishes assumptions. And the uncomfortable fact is that many of our most advanced sleep products are engineered for comfort in a narrow band of conditions: climate-controlled bedrooms, stable humidity, predictable nights, rather than for the raw physics of cold. Consider what most people buy as the centerpiece of warmth, the modern comforter. Its insulation depends on loft, on the expansion of fibers that trap air. Air is the real insulator, not the fabric. That part is ancient truth dressed in modern packaging. The problem is that loft is fragile. It is easily crushed by weight, movement, and time. More importantly, it is vulnerable to moisture. The human body is not a dry furnace. It exhales water vapor and perspires subtly all night, even in cold rooms. That moisture migrates into the bedding, and when it does, the loft begins to collapse. Fibers clump, air pockets shrink. The same blanket that felt warm at midnight can feel strangely inadequate at 4 a.m. when the moisture load is higher and your body's metabolism is slowed. This is where the laws of physics become merciless. Evaporation is not just dampness, it is heat theft. The latent heat of vaporization means that when water evaporates, it consumes energy, your energy. A bedding system that fails to manage moisture is quietly paying a thermodynamic tax all night, converting your body heat into invisible vapor that drifts away. Many synthetic fills and polyester shells exacerbate this by trapping humidity near the skin. They promise warmth, but they also create the conditions for evaporative cooling, the silent assassin of comfort. Then there is the modern mattress, the proud monument of consumer comfort, and often the greatest thief of warmth in the entire bed. We are taught to think of mattresses as neutral foundations, but from a heat transfer perspective, they are active participants. Thick foams and gels are marketed as cooling, which is simply another way of saying they are efficient at absorbing heat. That is not a feature in winter, that is a thermal sink. Material science tells us that large, dense masses with higher heat capacity can absorb energy and store it. When you lie on a modern foam mattress, your body becomes a heat source pressed against a heat reservoir. Conduction pulls warmth downward, slowly but relentlessly. You can pile a mountain of insulation on top and still feel cold because your heat is being drained into the mattress beneath you like water into dry soil. This is the modern illusion. We focus on what covers us and ignore what touches us. We treat warmth as a vertical problem, blankets stacked upward, when in reality it is a three-dimensional battle. Heat escapes downward through conduction, it escapes sideways through convection when air moves in and out of gaps, and it escapes through evaporation, an invisible pathway most people never account for. If a system fails at any one of these, it will leak warmth no matter how thick it appears. Our ancestors, without jargon, designed bedding that managed all three pathways. They sealed edges and tucked layers to prevent convection because moving air is an engine of heat loss. They placed dense wool beneath the body to reduce conduction because they understood that the surface below can steal warmth faster than the air above. And they favored materials that could handle moisture without collapsing because a damp bed is a cold bed. Here, the contrast becomes almost philosophical. Modern technology is often tool-first. It assumes the product is the solution, but the physics of winter demands technique-first thinking. A tool that cannot adapt to moisture, movement, and the shifting metabolism of a sleeping body becomes fragile. It becomes dependent on perfect circumstances, stable electricity, stable room temperature, stable humidity, like a modern grid that hums beautifully until the storm knocks it down. And storms do knock it down. When power fails, when a heating system goes silent, when the room drops rapidly, modern bedding reveals its weakness. It is not built as a survival system, it is built as a consumer experience. The old world built warmth like a shelter, with redundancy, with layered functions, with an understanding that winter is not a mood, but a force. So if you have ever wondered why you can feel cold beneath expensive bedding, why your best blankets sometimes fail you in the hours before dawn, the answer is not in your toughness, it is in thermodynamics and material science. The failure is not you, the failure is a system optimized for comfort marketing rather than for the ancient physics of heat. And once you see where modern bedding leaks heat, the path forward becomes brutally simple. Start where heat leaves fastest, not above you, but beneath you.
To understand the old-world logic of sleeping warm, you have to abandon the modern picture of heat as something that rises and therefore only needs to be trapped above you. That idea is a half-truth that became a superstition.
It is true that warm air rises in a room because convection lifts it, but your body in bed is not simply a candle under a ceiling. You are a living heat engine pressed against a surface, wrapped in layers, sweating faintly, breathing moisture into the night. Your heat does not behave like a single plume drifting upward. It bleeds out through every available pathway, and the first pathway, quiet, constant, underestimated, is downward. This is the fundamental principle our ancestors treated as sacred. Insulate below before you insulate above. In a cold cabin or a barracks, the air might bite your face, but it was the floor, the earth, and the bed beneath you that could drain you to weakness. Conduction does not need wind. It does not announce itself. It is the direct transfer of energy from a warmer object to a colder one through contact. Your body is warm. The mattress beneath you is cooler. The laws of thermodynamics do the rest. Heat flows until equilibrium tries to form, and unless you interrupt that flow, you will spend the night warming the bed instead of warming yourself. Modern mattresses, with their thick foam cores and cooling layers, are particularly efficient at this kind of theft. Foam is full of trapped air, yes, but it is also a continuous solid structure that can conduct heat away, and it has enough thermal mass to absorb warmth gradually for hours. If you have ever woken up cold while the space under you feels oddly warm, you have experienced this exchange, your body donating heat to a material that does not return it. Historical sleepers designed around this reality. They did not trust the bed to be their friend. They treated it as a cold surface that had to be neutralized. A dense wool blanket placed directly beneath the sleeper was not an afterthought. It was a barrier against the downward flow of heat. Wool is not magic, it is physics and structure. Its crimped fibers form resilient air pockets that resist compression. Those pockets interrupt conduction, because air is a poor conductor compared to solid material. Even when you lie on wool, it does not flatten into uselessness the way many modern fills do. It maintains its microstructure, a lattice of trapped air that remains insulating even under pressure. This is why cold weather doctrine across different eras converges on the same lesson. During World War II, military training emphasized insulation beneath the body as the first priority in cold conditions, because soldiers discovered that ground and floor conduction could ruin warmth faster than any wind. Polar explorers learned the same lesson in a more brutal classroom. You can survive frigid air if you are well sealed, but the wrong contact with ice or cold ground will sap you with terrifying speed. And long before formal doctrine, indigenous peoples across North America treated bottom insulation as foundational. Northern Plains tribes slept on buffalo robes or woven mats, not as decoration, but as thermal engineering, creating a barrier between the body and the relentless appetite of the earth. This principle appears far beyond America, because physics does not change with geography. In the highlands of Tibet and Mongolia, where nights turn severe even after bright days, herders traditionally relied on felted wool layers beneath and around the body. Felt is compressed fiber, dense enough to resist wind, but still structured enough to trap air. It is bottom insulation and moisture management in one ancient technology. In Scandinavia, people slept on layers of woolen textiles and animal skins not because they loved rustic aesthetics, but because the floor and bed frame were cold reservoirs. The solution was always the same: interrupt conduction at the point of contact. This is where modern comfort culture misleads us. We think softness is the goal. Our ancestors treated warmth as the goal and comfort as a byproduct. They were not building a luxury bed. They were building a thermal system in which the body's heat production, finite, metabolic, and precious, was conserved rather than squandered. When you grasp this, you begin to see bedding differently. A blanket on top can only trap what remains. If the foundation is leaking, your layers above are simply decorating a loss. Bottom insulation is not an accessory. It is the foundation of the entire structure. Without it, you are heating the mattress, the frame, the floor, and the winter itself. With it, you are finally heating the one space that matters, the narrow chamber of air your body lives inside through the night. Yet knowing the foundation is only phase one. The real advantage comes from what our ancestors mastered next, sealing the system so warmth can't escape through the smallest openings.
Once you understand the first principle, stop heat from escaping downward, you are ready for the subtler layer of ancestral technique, the layer that separates having blankets from using them as a system. Modern sleepers treat bedding as a drape. Our ancestors treated it as architecture. Their goal was not to cover the body, it was to shape a stable microclimate around it. And the difference between a warm night and a cold one often came down to details so small they feel almost absurd, until you remember that thermodynamics is ruled by small leaks. The old blanket arrangement worked because it controlled convection. Convection is the movement of fluid, air in this case, and moving air is a conveyor belt for heat loss. A loose comforter may be thick, but if it lifts at the shoulders, if it gaps at the neck, if it flutters when you turn, it allows warm air to escape and cold air to replace it. That exchange is a pump, and the body pays for it with calories in core temperature. The modern bed, with its untucked edges and open perimeter, often functions like a chimney. Warm air rises and spills out, pulling cooler air inward to replace it. This is why people sometimes wake up cold even under heavy bedding. They are not lacking insulation, they are suffering from uncontrolled airflow. Historical sleepers didn't fight cold by adding more bulk. They fought it by sealing the perimeter. They tucked blankets under the body not just for pressure, but to eliminate drafts. They folded layers strategically around feet and shoulders, not because they liked tightness, but because those zones are structural weak points in a heat envelope. The neck, the shoulders, the sides, these are the seams of your personal shelter. Leave them open and the system leaks. Seal them, and even modest materials can outperform modern bulk. This is technique over tool in its purest form. A modern sleeping bag is a manufactured envelope. It gives you shape and seals by design. But the old arrangement was a skill, the ability to take flat textiles and turn them into a heat chamber. If you've ever watched someone who knows how to bed down in cold weather, an older farmer, a soldier, a person who grew up without reliable heat, you see the difference immediately. They don't simply lie down and pull something over themselves. They build. They lay a base layer beneath the body. They add a second layer that can wrap and tuck. They add a top layer that provides stability, pressing the system into a coherent seal. The structure matters more than the loft. And then there is the second subtle enemy, moisture. Cold air is honest, you can feel it. Moisture is deceptive. It arrives quietly, carried by your own skin and breath, then turns warmth into a slow hemorrhage. The human body sheds water constantly. In a sealed microclimate, humidity rises. In the wrong materials, that humidity condenses and collapses insulation. This is why the old world trusted wool. Wool is a rare material that remains insulating when damp and manages moisture by pulling it away from the skin. Its fiber structure can absorb significant moisture while still feeling relatively dry, buffering the microclimate against the sudden chill of evaporation. Synthetic fibers tend to hold moisture at the surface, creating clamminess and promoting evaporative cooling, a thermodynamic siphon that steals heat right when your metabolism dips in the deep hours of night. So, the old arrangement often began with cotton near the skin, not because cotton is the warmest, but because it is comfortable, breathable, and can handle surface moisture without feeling abrasive. Then wool entered the system as the true thermal regulator, the layer that maintained loft and resisted humidity collapse. Finally, a heavier quilt or outer layer added stability and wind resistance, pressing the whole system into place so that movement and sleep did not create gaps. It was not a matching set, it was a thermal ecosystem, each material playing a role. Warmth does not come from uniformity, it comes from synergy. This is where modern marketing has quietly betrayed us. It sells coordinated bedding sets, same fabric, same fill, same aesthetic, as if thermal performance were a matter of visual harmony. But nature does not reward matching, it rewards function. The best cold weather systems in clothing are layered precisely because no single material can do everything at once. The same is true in bed.
A single synthetic comforter, no matter how thick, is a monolith trying to solve multiple problems: insulation, moisture, airflow, stability. And monoliths fail because physics attacks from multiple angles. Across cultures, the same wisdom appears. In Japan, traditional futon systems placed emphasis on layered bedding that could be aired, dried, and rearranged because moisture management was understood intuitively long before humidity control became a marketing term. In the Andes, indigenous communities used alpaca and longa wool textiles not just for warmth, but for their ability to handle damp cold at high altitude. The materials were chosen because they performed under real conditions, not showroom ones. The hidden wisdom, then, is not a secret trick, it is a way of thinking. Treat warmth as a designed environment. Treat every fold and tuck as a seal, every material as a function, and every gap as a thermodynamic liability. In that mindset, even a humble set of blankets becomes something modern consumers rarely possess: a resilient, self-powered shelter built from knowledge rather than electricity. This isn't theory dressed up as nostalgia. History is full of nights when these details meant the difference between waking up and not waking up.
To modernize, the old blanket arrangement can seem like quaint domestic tradition, something folded into the sepia glow of pioneer stories. But history does not preserve techniques because they are charming, it preserves them because they work under pressure. When you read the accounts of people who lived where winter was not an inconvenience but an occupying force, you begin to see bedding not as comfort culture but as fieldcraft, quiet, disciplined, and sometimes decisive. In 18th and 19th century North America, many soldiers and settlers slept in structures that barely deserved the name shelter. Barracks were often wooden, hurriedly built, poorly sealed, and full of drafts that moved like invisible rivers. Frontier cabins were frequently unfinished, their chinking imperfect, their floors cold enough to drink heat out of the body. Diaries and letters describe frost forming on interior walls before dawn, breath crystallizing in the air, snow drifting in through gaps when storms were strong enough. In these places, a bed was not a retreat from the environment. It was a smaller shelter built inside the larger shelter, and the quality of that micro-shelter mattered. Soldiers understood this in a brutal, practical way. In winter campaigns, warmth was directly linked to readiness. A man who slept cold did not march well, did not fight well, and was more vulnerable to illness. So soldiers developed routines: blankets beneath to block the bed's hunger for heat, blankets around to seal drafts, wool favored whenever possible because it continued to insulate even when damp from sweat or weather. This was not romanticized hardship, it was an applied solution to conduction, convection, and evaporation, the three thieves that never slept. By the 20th century, doctrine caught up to what experience had long taught. Cold weather manuals emphasized the same priorities: bottom insulation first, then sealing against drafts, then moisture control. The principle appears again and again because it is not cultural, it is physical. When you lie on a cold surface, your body becomes a donor to that surface. When air circulates freely around you, your heat is carried away. When moisture evaporates, your warmth is converted into vapor and lost. Military systems refined the tools, sleeping bags, insulated pads, but the logic remained ancestral. And beyond the military, entire cultures shaped their domestic lives around these truths. Indigenous peoples of the northern plains used buffalo robes not as luxury, but as life support textiles. A robe beneath the body interrupted conduction from the ground. A robe above trapped air and resisted wind. The system was modular, adjustable, and resilient, built for nights in teepees where the outside cold pressed close and the inside warmth had to be carefully guarded. The same logic can be seen in Arctic and subarctic regions, where insulation beneath the sleeper was treated as non-negotiable. Even in warmer seasons, the ground can be a cold sink. In winter, it is an active threat. To widen the lens beyond North America, consider the high steppe cultures of Central Asia, where winter arrives with fierce clarity and wind is relentless. Mongolian herders lived in jurs, yurts, structures designed to resist wind and retain heat, but even inside, the floor and the air could turn deadly cold. They relied heavily on felted wool mats and layers beneath the body, because felt resists drafts and maintains insulating structure under compression. A felt mat is not simply a rug, it is bottom insulation and moisture management fused into one tool. It is the same principle our ancestors practiced with wool blankets beneath the sleeper. Interrupt the downward flow, stabilize the microclimate. Or look to the Andes, where altitude turns night into a different species of cold. Indigenous communities there have long used alpaca and llama wool textiles, materials evolved for harsh climates because they trap air effectively and handle damp cold better than many plant fibers. In highland homes where temperature drops fast after sunset, bedding becomes a nightly shelter. The technique of layering and sealing is not optional, it is embedded in survival rhythms. Even early polar explorers, often celebrated for their gear, learned that no gear can compensate for the wrong system. They discovered, sometimes tragically, that insulation beneath the body was as critical as insulation above, and that moisture inside clothing and bedding could destroy warmth from within. They learned to treat their sleeping arrangements like a miniature camp, a controlled environment where heat production and heat loss had to be balanced. The human body produces a finite amount of thermal power. Waste it, and the cold wins. These examples converge on a single historical truth. Warmth was never primarily about having the best blanket. It was about arranging materials in ways that respected the physics of heat. People survived not because their winters were gentler, but because their knowledge was sharper. And the deeper lesson is almost uncomfortable for modern life. The resilience we admire in the past was often nothing more mystical than competence. Competence at managing energy, sealing systems, and refusing to let precious warmth leak away in the dark. That's the hidden pattern across every era and every climate. The winners weren't the people with the best gear. They were the people who understood the physics well enough to build warmth from almost nothing.
If you strip the story down to its core, you arrive at a conclusion that modern culture finds almost offensive. Warmth is not a product. Warmth is a skill. The difference matters because products fail, while skills adapt. A blackout does not care how much your comforter cost. A winter storm does not respect a brand name. And the real divide between fragile modern convenience and ancestral resilience is this. Modern people often depend on tools without understanding, while our ancestors depended on understanding with whatever tools they had. A tool is a fixed object. A technique is a way of shaping reality. A sleeping bag is a tool. It arrives already designed, already sealed, already shaped. It is convenient, and in many contexts, it is excellent. But it also teaches passivity. It invites you to believe that warmth is contained inside the purchase. The old blanket arrangement, by contrast, demanded participation. It demanded that you build a microclimate and defend it. It demanded attention to where heat escapes, how air moves, how moisture behaves, how contact surfaces steal warmth. It demanded literacy in thermodynamics, even if no one used that word. The mastery begins with the body's relationship to the surface beneath. A skilled sleeper does not treat the mattress as neutral. They assume it is a cold sink and they interrupt it. They build a bottom barrier that resists compression and maintains trapped air. Historically, wool, felt, furs, dense textiles, even layered straw when nothing else existed. This is not comfort. This is insulation under load, the most difficult kind, because the moment you lie on something, you crush it, and crushed insulation becomes a highway for conduction. The technique is not simply more layers, it is more structure, materials that keep their micro pockets of air even under your weight. Then comes the art of the envelope. Most people throw blankets over themselves like a curtain. The skilled builder wraps like a shelter maker. The goal is to eliminate convective exchange, warm air leaving, cold air entering. That means the sides matter more than people think. The shoulders matter, the neck matters, the feet, which often suffer first because they are far from the core and have less blood flow in cold conditions, matter intensely. An effective system does not rely on bulk to compensate for leaks. It eliminates the leaks. This is where older practice reveals itself as quietly sophisticated. The layers are not merely stacked, they are assigned roles. A breathable inner layer keeps the skin comfortable and reduces the harshness of direct contact with coarse insulation. A thermal middle layer traps air and continues to insulate in humid conditions. This is where wool remains a gold standard because it resists loft collapse and buffers moisture. An outer layer adds stability, weight, and draft resistance, pressing the system into a sealed form so that tossing and turning does not open vents. It is the same logic as mountaineering clothing: base layer, insulation layer, shell, different materials, different jobs, one coherent system. And the most modern piece of science hiding in all of this is the simplest. The body produces a finite heat output, measured in watts, like a small heater. At rest, a human might generate on the order of 100 watts or so, fluctuating with metabolism, body size, and sleep stage. That is not infinite. If your system leaks, you cannot brute force your way out with willpower. You will wake cold because the physics is doing what physics always does, moving energy from warm to cold. The technique is about reducing loss so that your finite output can sustain a stable microclimate. This is why matching sets and thicker is better are such poor guides. A thick comforter may be a good insulator in a dry, controlled room, but if it traps moisture and lets air exchange at the edges, it becomes a false fortress, impressive walls with open gates. The technique-centered system looks less glamorous, sometimes even rougher, but it performs because it is designed like a survival shelter, redundant, layered, sealed, and aware of moisture. To master it is to reclaim a kind of autonomy. You stop being a consumer of warmth and become a builder of warmth. You begin to sense drafts as design flaws. You begin to treat the mattress as a thermal enemy that must be neutralized. You begin to appreciate wool not as rustic nostalgia, but as a sophisticated material shaped by nature for temperature regulation. You stop chasing the perfect product and start refining your system. And when you do, you discover something almost spiritual in its simplicity. The moment you understand how to trap air, stop conduction, and manage moisture, you are no longer at the mercy of winter's mood or the grid's stability. You are holding an ancestral power in your hands, a technique that survives scarcity, power outages, and the unpredictable volatility of modern life. Tools are nice, but technique is resilience. Because when the grid goes silent and the room temperature begins to fall, only two things still work: the heat your body can make and the knowledge you're carrying.
There is a reason this old knowledge feels foreign to modern life. It belongs to a time when winter was not an inconvenience, but a season that negotiated with your survival. Central heating did not merely warm rooms, it rewired culture. It taught generations that warmth is automatic, that cold is an error, that discomfort is a failure of the home rather than a reality of nature. We stopped thinking in terms of systems and began thinking in terms of switches. When the thermostat replaced the craft of insulating, the mind relaxed. And when the mind relaxes long enough, it forgets. That forgetting has a cost, and the cost is revealed whenever modern convenience stumbles. It is revealed in blackouts that turn houses into cold shells within hours. It is revealed in winter storms that topple lines and freeze transformers. It is revealed in a society whose buildings are often designed for energy efficiency under normal operation, yet can lose heat frighteningly fast when the grid goes silent. A bed, under those circumstances, becomes more than furniture. It becomes a last shelter. It becomes the place where the body must defend its core temperature through the night, using nothing but its own metabolic fire in whatever system you build around it. This is where ancestral wisdom stops being nostalgia and becomes strategy. Our predecessors did not survive harsh winters because the past was kinder. The past was not kinder. The past was simply more honest.
It did not pretend that nature would accommodate you. It demanded that you accommodate nature. And in accommodating it, people developed a kind of quiet competence that modern life rarely requires. Competence at managing energy, at building microclimates, at understanding the physics that govern whether you shiver or sleep. What makes this knowledge powerful is that it scales from comfort to crisis without changing its principles. In a mildly cool bedroom, it gives you deeper warmth with less bulk, less sweating, and more stability through the night. In a power outage, it becomes a protective system that can keep you safe when your house can no longer do the job. For the elderly, whose thermoregulation is often weaker and whose recovery from cold stress can be slower, this is not a trivial advantage. It is resilience. It is risk reduction. It is the difference between discomfort and danger when winter presses in. And there is a deeper legacy here, beyond personal comfort. Techniques are cultural inheritance. They are knowledge stored not in libraries but in hands and habits. When a society forgets technique, it becomes dependent on a fragile chain of tools, supply lines, and electricity. When that chain breaks, even briefly, the society discovers how thin its competence has become. The old blanket arrangement is not just about sleeping warmer, it is an emblem of a larger principle. The world rewards those who understand the fundamentals, not those who merely buy the latest layer of convenience. In physics, entropy is always increasing. Systems naturally drift toward disorder unless energy is invested to maintain order. Modern life invests that energy through infrastructure, power plants, grids, logistics networks, climate control. It works beautifully until it doesn't. Ancestral technique is not a rejection of modernity, it is a redundancy against it. It is a way of carrying a small piece of order inside yourself, a way of maintaining warmth without needing an external machine to provide it. So the call to action is not to romanticize hardship. Our ancestors didn't romanticize it either, they optimized around it. The call is to reclaim competence, to look at your bed and see a shelter you can design rather than a product you consume, to remember that warmth is a finite resource and that the smartest systems are those that waste the least, to build bottom insulation that resists conduction, to seal the perimeter so convection cannot pump your heat away, to choose materials that manage moisture so evaporation does not steal what your body works to produce. Because the next storm, the next outage, the next unpredictable winter night will not ask what brand you own. It will ask what you know. And knowledge, unlike electricity, does not depend on a grid. It lives in you. It can be practiced tonight. It can be passed on. It can be remembered.